Welcome back. If you are prepping to raise your first round of funding and you're finding yourself doing things like staring at Canva or PowerPoint, probably at 2 a.m., wondering if you should DIY it or if you should hire help, this episode is for you. By the end of it, you'll have an idea whether or not you need to hire someone, and if you do, about how much you should be spending. So stay tuned. Let's get into it. I hope you're having an amazing day. I know that can be hard in startup life when you have literally the highest of highs and the lowest of lows every single day, it seems like. But I truly believe any day that we are out building something we believe in and we have the luxury to do that is a good day. Okay, let's get into pitch decks. How much should you be spending? Do you need to hire someone? How do you know if you need to hire someone? And how do you find that person or service or whatever? So we're going to cover all that today. But first, I want to talk about why this matters. And I think this is really important. So your deck is typically the first impression that investors are going to have of you. And it's the first impression, even if you're asking somebody for introductions, you're sending this deck off to somebody, and in order for them to even feel confident to introduce you to other investors, you got to look professional. You got to have a good deck. It just is a thing. I covered an episode of that last week on why you need a good pitch deck, all the reasons last week or week before. But it really is super important. A clean, clear, professional deck signals to investors that you understand your market and that you respect their time and that you are somebody professional enough for them to pay attention to. However, you do not need to spend like 10 grand to make that great. And I spent a lot of money on crap when I was first raising money. I spent $2,000 on one Excel spreadsheet. Now, I will say that Excel spreadsheet, it was totally worth it, but it was a lot of money. And I don't know, I mean, it just seems ridiculous to spend that much now on that. I think there's way more resources, so you shouldn't have to. But that was somebody putting together, using their template for financial projections, dropping my company and product into it, and using some of their industry knowledge to project out like what the projections could be. And that really did help me. So it was totally worth $2,000, but that can be a lot of money when you are just like barely making ends meet, trying to get something off the ground and need to go out and raise money. So, okay, here's why you need to do this. Typically, as the founder, as the entrepreneur, as the product person that you most likely are in your company, you have done pitch decks for your customers on some way, shape, or form. Like you could look at your website as a form of a pitch deck, or maybe if you're a consumer product, you're pitching to retailers. You've got a deck about your product that you're pitching to retailers. If you're a B2B, you might be pitching to other businesses. So you probably have some sort of deck for customers, but an investor deck is going to be typically very different. You're reframing your product and your company in a very different way than you would for a customer. So an investor typically wants to know, what do you do? But they want to know in simple language. They're probably not from your industry. So you don't want to use industry jargon or words, stuff that they're not going to understand unless they've been in that industry. Whereas a customer is deep in your industry, most likely, especially a B2B customer. They know it inside and out. So you can use all the jargon that you want and make all the assumptions that they know all the stuff that is in your brain. An investor, you can't do that. So they just want to know what you do in a very simple way. They want to know how far along are you? How big is the market? How do you make money? This is so important. Again, in a simple way. And what is your capability to execute? Again, customers, they don't care about most of those things. They are going to care more about how the product functions, how the pricing applies to them, how it might solve their specific problem, whereas investors are going to want to know, how does it solve a more general market problem? So that's framing it very differently. A customer is going to want to understand the nitty gritty of that product, whereas an investor really wants to understand more of the nitty gritty of the business side of things as they get into it. Again, there's exceptions across the board, but in general, for most people, this is going to be true. So with that, if you have not done an investor deck before, it can be really helpful to get somebody's help and feedback, whether it's an individual or an agency or whoever. And there are so many tools out there where you can drop your deck into an AI tool and it will polish it and make it pretty. So I'm still getting decks that are just like text on a white background or very basic. They look dated, they look old. There are so many online tools that are just super simple that you literally just upload your PowerPoint or your PDF and it will redo the whole thing for you. Now, the problem is if you're uploading a deck that's framed more for a customer than an investor, you might have a pretty looking deck, but the story, the narrative, the content isn't going to be applicable to an investor and you're going to lose them. It's not going to make sense. They're not going to follow it. And guess what? They're going to close after like 3 slides. They're going to give you 5 seconds and be out. So while there's a lot of free services or, software, I should say, AI software that can do your deck for you, those really only work well if you've already got the story and the narrative and all that done. So I don't think you need to hire a designer. Like if you've got the story and the narrative and all that perfect, I don't think you need to hire a designer. You can drop it into like SlideSpeak or Beautiful.ai, and those will fine tune it. They'll put it in a pretty template, make it look beautiful, professional. You just got to go through it with a fine tooth comb, make sure there's no spelling mistakes, formatting mistakes, and just, again, make sure there's not too much content, keep it simple. But if you've got all that stuff dialed, you don't need to pay anything. You just drop it into an AI tool, start getting feedback, make sure it makes sense. Now, if you have not pitched to investors before and you're not sure how to frame it to them, then you need more than AI help because it's like ChatGPT right now. The info you get out is only as good as the prompts you put in. So if you're putting in kind of a crappy deck with way too much info that doesn't have the right narrative, you're going to get a beautiful looking crappy deck back. So that's when you really do need to hire someone. So let's go into the pricing landscape a little bit. I've got kind of my own experience, and then I did a little bit of research on this just to kind of see what else was out there right now. You've got basically at the entry level freelancers, you're paying anywhere from like, if you go to Upwork, $25 to $50 an hour. They might clean up your slides. They're most likely just going to drop it into an AI, software to come up with a template and maybe reformat it a little bit. So totally fine. Again, if you think you have your deck dialed and you want to do that. If you're going up to more mid-level designers, you're looking at anywhere from $50 to $100 an hour or flat packages that range from like $1,000 to $3,000. And they will typically, what I've seen, and just kind of researching what's out there today, the top people doing this are agencies. For the $1,000 to $3,000 range, they're taking your deck and they're just polishing it up. So they're not doing a bunch of, back and forth with you on the narrative and all of that. So they're not taking time to understand your business. So again, if you have a great pitch deck to start and you're giving it to them and they can fine tune it, totally fine. But if you're going to get into like full service, studios, agencies, you're looking at $3,000 to $7,000 and sometimes $10,000+. At that level, they are shaping your narrative. They're doing, more custom design tweaking. They are advising often on fundraising strategy. So if someone's quoting you under $500 for a full deck, expect mostly just template tweaking. They're just going to take yours, drop it into a template, and maybe tweak it a little bit. If someone is quoting you $10,000 or even $7,000, make sure that you are getting one-on-one feedback and strategy on how to optimize the content in your deck, how to refine the narrative, the story, and really make sure you have got a awesome, solid, clear, crystal clear deck that you're ready to go out and pitch investors. Now, what I will say about that pricing, right? So you've got 500 and let's just go up to 7,000. If you do the 500 and your narrative isn't dialed in and you go out and you spend 4 months pitching investors and it's a struggle, you've lost 4 months of time and your time is so valuable. And not only just time, but you've then lost all these investor meetings that you've had who are just quote unquote not interested, but really they're struggling to understand something. There's a gap and it's not getting through to them. Or they're just not interested. But if they're not, they should be giving you additional introductions. And if they're not giving you introductions, they have concerns. They might not be telling you the concerns. I had coffee with a woman this morning and she was talking about, she's been pitching angel groups and she's like, God, I just wish they would give me a no. They drag it out. Nobody wants to tell you no. I don't know why. And they, just do the decency of giving some feedback and giving a no is so much more helpful than dragging someone along for any angel groups who happen to be listening. But anyway, so back to it. So I think, again, if you're going to go at that higher price point, just make sure you're really getting a lot of help. So, okay, how do you decide what is right for you? So first of all, if you've done an initial deck, I think you need to get some feedback. Again, if you've never pitched to investors before, you've probably pitched to customers, you've talked a ton about your product, and you're probably used to forming presentations and decks for your customer. And you really should get some third-party feedback on whether or not your deck is just positioned and framed correctly for investors. The other thing you want to do, the basic level, remove, if you've got a ton of writing, if you have any paragraphs, any at all, they need to go away. No paragraphs in pitch decks. Fine print, investors aren't going to read it. It needs to be simple. It needs to be clear. So if you're starting with a deck that is, your narrative is good, and it's simple. You don't have a ton of stuff on your deck. You don't have any paragraphs. You feel like you've covered the story and the narrative that is going to attract investors, not be framed for customers. If you've got that, then I would say as a next step, just drop it into an AI tool and then get some feedback on it and see if it's clear. If you think, if you're looking at your deck and you have a bunch of, paragraphs on it, if it's too long, which is really more than 12 slides, 15 absolute max. If it's too long and it's not, you are struggling to whittle it down, you're not sure if the narrative is correct, you've pitched a few investors and you're not getting really constructive feedback, I think it could be worth paying someone. Because again, otherwise you're going to just limp along, struggling to, struggling to get to the point where you do finally have to get it fine-tuned and then go out and pitch investors again. So you're just sucking up time, which is the one thing you don't have because you need money right away. Totally get that. So if you're raising 250 to like $1 million, maybe $2 million, you definitely don't need a big $7,000, $10,000, deck. I think if you're raising under 2 million, spend under 7,000 for a deck. If you are raising more than that, if you're raising like 5 million, you've already got a few million in revenue, then you might want to go straight to a bigger agency, spend the 10 to 15K and have this thing super dialed. Typically you're going to get more materials for that also. I always had a one-pager, like an executive summary, as well as a pitch deck. And I really like the executive summary, just one page. It covers most of what's in your deck, but it's really easy for people to scan. It's a nice kind of follow-up item. So they're typically going to put together a series of materials for you, which is really nice. It's all done for you, packaged up, you're good to go. So that's really, you're only paying those higher price points if you're at that higher revenue level and seeking that higher level of funding. Otherwise, you should be in the less than $3,000 range for getting your pitch deck dialed in. If you don't have that story dialed, so remember, content beats design. So if you have this polished deck, but the content isn't good, you're going to struggle to raise money. If you've got really dialed content, but your deck doesn't look professional, that's also going to be a struggle, but it'll be less of a struggle than the opposite. So most important is that the story, the narrative, the way you've framed your business is catering to investors and not just to a customer. Some instances, again, they might be very similar, but most of the time they're going to be very different. Again, I always had like a deck I was pitching to retailers and then deck pitching to investors, and they were very different, very, very different. So a gorgeous deck with a weak story won't close investors. A solid story with decent visuals most likely can. And the irony is most of the pitch deck services out there, they are just doing the design, not the content part, which kills me because that's the most important part. So if you're on a budget, I suggest kind of a hybrid approach. Write your story, rough out your slides, hire a mid-level designer to kind of polish it. You're probably going to spend around $1,000, $2,000, but it will look professional. Also, make sure you budget for a round of revisions. Make sure you're going to get some actual feedback on your content, not just the design. I spoke with a different woman who has that, and she said she was quoted $5,000 to do the deck, and there was no live phone call with that. And I was like, that's crazy. That just seems not right. Because the biggest part that people need help with is the feedback on how to fine tune the narrative and the story. So budget, enough to get that dialed in. Make sure you're getting some real feedback. Make sure you can get a round of revisions, because after good decks, even as polished as they might be, are still going to evolve slightly as you start getting them in front of investors. So in an ideal world, if you go out, you create the pitch deck, you pay someone to help you, you go pitch 10, 15 investors, you get some feedback, then go back to that person or agency, whoever you hired, and say, okay, this is the feedback I've gotten. I need to implement this into the deck. And then have them implement that round of revisions. That can be super, super helpful. And that should be totally realistic to ask for that. Okay, so quick takeaway for today. I think expect to spend between $1,000 to $3,000 for a solid professional deck. If you're not spending anything, you need to really have a deep understanding of what is required to capture an investor's attention. And you need to either be a graphic designer or use an AI tool and have a good sense of design so that you can make sure it's balanced, it's clear, it's just dialed and looks professional. Only spend more on that if you need significant help with the narrative and the storytelling. And again, make sure you're going to get some live feedback from that person and get a round of revisions after you've put it in front of some investors. The other thing I would say, don't overspend too early, but don't underinvest if design and clarity are going to get you to raise faster. So you don't want to waste a ton of time. And if you're going out there with a crappy deck, you're going to waste a bunch of time. So hopefully that was helpful. If you need someone to review your deck and tell you, yeah, your story's good. Yeah, it's clear. Yeah, it's compelling. Or work on your design, work on your whatever. I do free calls. I will review your deck. You can also email it to me. I just had a guy email me his deck and I'm sending him some feedback. So I love looking at these things. Take advantage of it. Book a call with me on LinkedIn or just email hello@seedmoneypodcast.com. Reach out. Happy to give you feedback. I have done a gazillion decks and spent years fundraising with all odds against me. And so I love using that knowledge and helping other people out because I know what a tough process it is. But I truly believe the best way to get funded is by being fully prepared. So reach out, let me know if I can help, and otherwise, happy pitching. See you next time.